Good evening, everybody. The Music Fan is back, bringing smiles to the faces, knowledge to the people, and most importantly, music to the masses. I have been in kind of a slump in terms of putting out videos. It's basically because of things at work, things that all across the world, just putting me in a little bit of a down state. But I still have been listening to music, and I think it's perfect time to unveil a new segment, something that I've been thinking about for a couple of months now, just so I can get you more material. I like to call it If You Haven't Heard. Now, what's the idea of this premise? This is a video where I go over 5 albums that I don't have a lot to talk about, but have enough to be able to get you some information. That way I can go over more CDs as the year goes on, and you get an idea of what I've been listening to. The plan is I'm going to be doing this once a month or bi-weekly, depending on how many CDs I can get done to listen to, and while also still be doing the RUNs. I hope that you enjoy this, and I'm going to try to theme it every so often. This one is going to be 5 hard rock / metal albums that I have listened to mostly through January and February. So sit back and relax, because this is If You Haven't Heard. We start off with Apocalyptica with Cell O. This is the 9th album from Helsinki, Finland symphonic metal / neoclassical metal alt metal band Apocalyptica. This is a band that I never really took a listen to. This is a band that I know that my brother has loved throughout the years. I've constantly heard him sing the phrase, "I'm not Jesus, Jesus wasn't there." Of course, the Corey Taylor song that they have done, and one of their more popular songs. From what I understood, I thought that they were strictly a cover band because I had seen their first album as they had covered most of Metallica's work. But to my surprise, this is the first album in 17 years that is strictly, for the most part, instrumental. And also there's a concept behind this. I didn't get it at first, and I still honestly don't see it, but apparently this concept is about the God particle and how cells make up everything. You structure it to eventually make the things that we love. Just like with music, you have parts and pieces that eventually form the idea. Same thing with cells. You don't really get it on here in my opinion, but I do see another concept that they talked about how humanity both builds up and breaks down everything. And you kind of see this throughout the album with the idea of softer pieces building up before breaking down into something much heavier. A perfect example is Fire and Ice. I really enjoyed this particular song. It starts off with a really soft and kind of atmospheric piece where it's mostly a flute solo. Really gets you in the mood, kind of gets you into this war state where the drums kind of feel like the beginning of a war. And then it eventually gets much heavier and more hectic and more dissonant as it feels like everything is falling apart. And then eventually it smooths down at the end. When this album is doing the double idea well and builds, it comes to be some of the better songs on the album. Take, for instance, En route to Mayhem. This song is a barn burner. It starts hectic. It gets even more hectic as you get to the middle part, where you get some heavier drums and some frantic guitar work. It's probably the most energetic song on the album, and it is such a great song to listen to. We also have Scream for Silent, which at the beginning, it feels like it could be perfectly placed on a soundtrack for a really epic adventure video game or movie. This vibe, it's beautiful, but it has so much energy. And then halfway through, it switches into something a little bit more energetic, a little bit more genty. Both ideas work very well, making for a very memorable time. Rounding out the best songs, Beyond the Stars, which is, to me, a phenomenal closer. So much epic energy. It just is frantic the whole entire way through. With an album that's talking about building up and breaking down, this is a great way of ending it with as much energy as possible. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of the spoken word part at the end. It feels like an added filler to bring out the story when you didn't really see it at first, but a really cool way of ending the album. However, there are some missteps in my opinion. Ashes of the Modern World, a great opener, It has this solid energy, nice dissonant approach. It feels like it has this contrast between animalistic drums and a little bit more sophisticated string parts. And also the second phase of this song where it gets a little bit more amped up and a little bit more energetic, a little bit more complex with the string work, works for the most part. But I think there's a disconnect between how these two get there and then especially how you get back to the first feel at the end. Cello, the title track, also is pretty good. It has some nice parts. I really like the chorus melody, the do 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 do. Really, really cool. I like the staccato work, especially when it's just by itself at the end. There's also some really solid parts in the middle with a little bit more active drum work, and I really enjoy the chord progression at the last part. However, this is a 10-minute song, and it feels like it overstays its welcome straight from the beginning. Once you get to the 2-minute point, that's where it gets interesting, but you have to suffer through 2 minutes, in my opinion. Call My Name is a slow starter, but eventually does build into something nice. If only the main melody was a little bit more interesting, in my opinion. And Catharsis is not as active as the other songs on the album, but it does have a nice ebb and flow, keeping you invested through most of it. The really only head scratcher, in my opinion, is Rise. This one is supposed to try to be something beautiful, and it does try to have a nice build, but by the time you get to the end, it feels a little bit too late. I'm not a huge fan of the cello melody, and from there, the counter melodies that are introduced is not interesting. It kind of feels discombobulated. Overall, a solid album. It's one that has been hard for me to get into multiple listens, though, in my opinion. I think this is perfect for a full listen. Next up, we have Poppy with I Disagree. This is the third album from Boston, Massachusetts singer, songwriter, actress, author, YouTuber, model, and apparently religious leader. Poppy, also known as Mariah Rose Pereira. This is also the last album that is going to be with the collaborative work from Titan Sinclair. Apparently, they are breaking up their creative venture because of the way that she has been treated by Titan Sinclair. You can read a little bit more on it because I don't know much about Poppy. This is my first dive into her. I've heard about her from both Anthony Fantano as well as Film Theory, where they have talked about her videos. She seemed interesting enough to me, and this particular idea of metal and pop approach seemed interesting because I've never listened to them. This seems like what baby metal would be to me. But again, I have no idea. I still want to check it out and see what was the idea. And honestly, I was pleasantly surprised by it. I like this vibe of pop and metal, and it works pretty well most of the point because it feels so diverse in style. There's a lot of songs that use new metal ideas, there's a lot of songs that use industrial ideas, and in an interesting way. One particular song that stands out to me is Anything Like Me. I like this approach that's a little bit industrial, also has this Billie Eilish vibe, a little bit more spoken work. What works so well is that it does fully embrace that metal idea. It mixes this pop and metal ideas so well. I find the lyrics themselves pretty haunting. A lot of this album seems to be dealing with Poppy's perception with herself and how the music industry has treated her, and throughout it's giving this voice to finally breaking away from who she is and who she wants to be. Fill the Crown is another highlight, feeling a little bit like a Marilyn Manson song. It's a little bit twisted throughout, where it has this vibe of pop at the beginning, and then it gets this very industrial computer idea before breaking into something that Marilyn Manson would definitely have sung. Sick of the Sun, I really enjoy with its vibe of more a laid-back approach, a little bit more like a atmospheric alt rock sound. I really enjoy the vocals on here. And Don't Go Outside is one hell of a closer, in my opinion, kind of keeping that acoustic vibe, but then eventually getting into something a little bit more metal, and then eventually bringing a lot of the ideas from the rest of the album back in as a reprieve. The strength of this album is the diversity of it, because it's not just solely focusing on new metal, it's not solely focusing on industrial, it's not solely focusing on pop, and instead it builds this world that is very interesting to me. And it's only 35 minutes, so it's not like it overstays its welcome. However, in my opinion, there is one song that I'm not a huge fan of, and that is the opener, Concrete. I think there is too much of mixing of ideas to make it feel solidified. It kind of just goes all over the place, starting off with something that's a little bit more speed metal and then doing a little bit more show tuney, and then you get like this Beatles, Beach Boys-esque idea before going back into the main idea and then ending with this anthemic rock. It feels a little bit too all over the place, in my opinion, to make it an interesting opener. And there are some times where these mixing of ideas just doesn't work in its favor. However, with it being as short as it is, and with the interesting ideas, I say it's worth a full listen. Next up, we have Sons of Apollo with 2020 MMXX. If you remember me talking about the band Flying Colors last year and how much I loved them, I had talked about how Mark Portnoy had two side projects, Flying Colors and Adrenaline Mob. I completely forgot to talk about Sons of Apollo. It is another super group with Mike Portnoy as drummer, Derek Sheridan, who has worked with Dream Theater. You have Jeff Scott Soto, who's worked with a couple other bands as the lead vocalist, Robin Bubblefoot Tall, who was the guitarist for Guns N' Roses at some point. This is another super group. If I was to put it in between Adrenaline Mob and Flying Colors, this is kind of smack dab in the middle. A progressive band that has a little bit more of a harder feel. I didn't hear Psychonic Symphony, but I was interested, of course, to check out their next work, see if it piqued my interest, and it does for the most point. There's a lot of really solid progressive songs with a harder hook. I think Jeff Scott Soto is a decent vocalist. He's not my favorite vocalist out of the supergroups, but he does enough, particularly Asphyxiation with its very dissonant feel. I think his voice works super well on here. I think Goodbye Divinity is a decent opener. It has some great progressive feel, and I love how it builds into its main hook. King of the Lucian also has some great building as well. I love the piano work. It is so trippy, dissonant, feels like you're on a ride through space before it eventually gets into its hard and heavy hooks. And then it does move around throughout that feel, which makes it one of the more interesting songs. False Ascend and Resurrection Day, also hard and heavy with its guitar work, making for some solid songs. And New World Today as a closer, it is the staple idea of a 15-minute track to end the album. And it does well throughout its vibes. It's not my favorite long outro track, but it's serviceable. But I think the problem here is that in terms of feel, it doesn't do anything different. It's not really diverse in sound. And there are some kind of paint-by-number songs like Desolate July. It has a decent solo, has a good vibe. It's a ballad, but it doesn't really do much different from other progressive ballads that you have heard. The chorus isn't that interesting in my opinion. It's making for a pretty lackluster song. And then Wither to Black, again, not very interesting. In all, it's serviceable. If you're looking for some good progressive, it's not bad. But in my opinion, Flying Colors is still far and away the best band, and there isn't really much that's getting me to come back to this album. It just feels a little bit too long and too paint by numbers, not enough diversity. That being said, it is still worth a full listen if you are a progressive fan. Next up, we have New Empire Volume 1 by Hollywood Undead. Okay, so this is the 6th album from Los Angeles, California rap rock new metal band Hollywood Undead. This is a band that has piqued my interest a couple times. I've heard about them first, like many of you probably, with Rock Band 2 and We Are Young. I've listened to an album or two of them. I haven't found anything interesting. Basically, if you've never heard of this band, think of Linkin Park if they never grew up and matured or tried any different sounds. I didn't have any expectations, but I was like, it's a 30-minute album. Let's check it out. And oh boy, if you think that the Green Day album is the worst album from this year, at least it has diversity. This album is so cliche and so paint by numbers, it hurts. There really isn't many highlights. The chorus of Already Dead isn't bad until they enhance it vocally. It's not a horrible single. Empire has the best chorus on the album, just one particular part, the Empire. I like that idea. However, the lead vocalist is nowhere near Chester Bennington. It is a little bit too nasally, especially when you get to the chorus of Already Dead. You try to hate me, you could try to break me. But the thing is, he's probably the best part of this album. There's some solid ideas musically because of his work. Enemy has some solid energy as well. Upside Down ain't bad either. And Second Chances could have been something that I could have seen Linkin Park record. It's not great, but it's not terrible, making it for the best song on the album. However, the problem with this album is there's so much lackluster rapping, and I didn't remember how bad of rappers these people were. Killing It is a pain in the ass to listen to. It is one of the worst brag rap songs I've ever heard, where they're talking about how they can rap so fast, I can rap faster than the whole damn band, and how they compare themselves to Jay-Z, and it's like, you're not even close. You're not even close. It's absolute garbage. Nightmare tries to be deep and heavy, but the rapping sucks. Except for the last verse, finally, where there's some good rapping. It is honestly a waste of a closing song. I didn't even realize it was the closing song until we got to there. And it's very ironic. The last verse, or the last word, is an homage to, out of all things, Rain Man from Eminem. Unless that is an homage to something else, where he's talking about he just spent 32 bars and didn't say shit, which I think is completely fitting for this album, because this album is 32 minutes long and they didn't do a damn thing with it. Skip this. This is the worst album I've heard so far. And then finally, we have Five Finger Death Punch with F8. And as the title has said, this is the 8th album from Las Vegas, Nevada, heavy metal, groove metal, alt metal, hard rock band Five Finger Death Punch. I have enjoyed a lot of their work. Call it a guilty pleasure if you want, but I think War is the Answer, American Capitalist, and Wrong Side of Heaven, both parts 1 and 2, are pretty solid groove metal albums. Of course, I think their best albums are War is the Answer and American Capitalist. Some great singles on there. They've done well over the years, but the last few albums have just not been great. Got Your Six and Justice for None, not really interesting in my opinion. They've also been working with Bad Wolves. I love the first Bad Wolves album, absolutely hate the second one for the most part. So I was hoping that with the lackluster Bad Wolves album, they could at least give us a pretty decent Five Finger Death Punch album. And you know what? They kind of did. It's not incredible. It doesn't harken back to the best work from them, but it does enough to make it a decent album. Inside Out harkens back to that older Five Finger Death Punch. It does have a great groove with some solid choruses and verses that aren't too over the top. And the string section also adds some nice work to it. I also really enjoy Darkness Settles In. It definitely could be a great single for them. The build is really solid, the melody is beautiful, and the picture they paint about the effects of addiction, especially alcoholism, makes for a solid song. This is War. Very simple in message. They've talked about this stuff before, but I just enjoy the heavy riffing on there, and it is the heaviest song on the album. And The Brighter Side of Grey is a solid closer with a nice sentiment about being there long after you're gone. Definitely has some single potential. Everything else either is pretty mediocre or not worth it in my opinion. A Little Bit Off has some nice sentiment about dealing with depression and struggling with day to day, but it makes it so poppy. I don't like the vocal enhancements, and the hey, yeah, 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 yeah chorus is just throw it up in my hands. You know, I don't know what they're doing with that. Bottom of the Top is boring and derivative, talking about, can I be the bottom of the top or the top of the bottom? Songs like Mother May I, Full Circle, and Living the Dream try to discuss problems in the world, but so in such a bare bones way. Mother May I in particular feels like it's supposed to be two different songs, with talking about TikTok and about celebrity, and then going into this kind of religious sense idea. I don't know, but it just doesn't work in my opinion. What the hell also is with the vocals on Scar Tissue? It sounds like he's actually gargling water or has marbles in his mouth as he is singing. It's not pleasant at all. But overall, it's not a bad album. It is a little bit long though, so I would say pick and choose. In my opinion, Darkness Settles In, This Is War, The Brighter Side of Grey, and Inside Out are the best songs, and there are some other solid songs throughout, but don't expect a cohesive album that is perfect and brings them back to their heyday. So those are the 5 that I am reviewing today. Maybe it was a little bit long, but I just had to get this format down. I'll definitely cut it down on the next one. In my opinion, if we were to rank them all, of course, number 5 is New Empire Volume 1, which God, I hope there's not a volume 2. Then we have F8. I would go with then... It's a toss-up. I think the last 3 are kind of a toss-up, but if I was to pick between the 3, I would go with I Disagree. Then I would go with 2020, and then finally go with Cell O. I don't think any of these are a head and shoulders above these, but I think there's enough there to satisfy listeners and find some interesting ideas. So that is my time. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you like or hate about these 5 albums. Let me know other albums from 2020 you'd like me to review. Share this with your friends, and most importantly, subscribe to my channel. That way I know that you enjoy what I'm doing and want to see this channel become bigger and better for the future. This coming week, I think the plan is I'm going to try to do 2 RU-ins and maybe sprinkle in another if you haven't heard, if I have the time. I think the idea is I'm going to do Wednesday, Friday, and then if you haven't heard on Sunday if I have the time for it. I will be back on Wednesday with another RU-in. Until then, this is Music Fan, and I'm signing off.